Section 11.2 StatCrunch. We're going to work problem 14 from the ebook. Is seatbelt use independent of cigarette smoking? A study of seatbelt users and non-users yielded the randomly selected sample data summarized in the given table. Test the claim that the amount of smoking is independent of seatbelt use. A plausible theory is that people who smoke more are less concerned about their health and safety and are therefore less inclined to wear seatbelts. Is this theory supported by the sample data? The first thing we want to do is check the assumptions and conditions. And the first assumption was that we had randomly selected data. And in fact, it states that in the problem, randomly selected sample data. The numbers in the table are counts. And finally, we need to check the expected cell counts. They all have to be greater than 5. So what I did was I went in my stat lab, and let's check on how we do that. We go to StatCrunch, and we go to StatCrunch website, and then we go to Open StatCrunch. And so I went to StatCrunch and got a blank data table, and I entered the information in the table. So the first column I put in as the row labels. Wear seatbelt, don't wear seatbelt, and then I put in the cigarette usage across the columns here and put in the numbers from the table. So I click on Stat, Tables, Contingency with Summary, and I'm going to go ahead and I want to do, the columns are going to be the cigarette usage, which are 4 columns, and then the row labels are the seatbelt use. And I want to get the expected cell counts right now, and I'm also going to get the chi-square test for independence down here. Okay, so my expected cell counts, I look at the second number here in parentheses in each of the cells, and I notice that they're all greater than 5. And in fact, this is my smallest observed cell, and that would be the one I would be most concerned about in terms of expected cell counts, but they're all greater than 5. So I'm good to go. Now, what are my hypotheses? The null is going to be that the two variables are independent. Cigarette usage is independent of seatbelt usage. The alternative is cigarette usage is not independent of seatbelt usage. So I look at my chi-square statistic, 3 degrees of freedom, and that's because we have 2 rows. 2 minus 1 is 1. 4 columns, 4 minus 1 is 3, so I have 3 degrees of freedom. The chi-square test statistic is about 1.36. The p-value is about 0.72. Very, very large. So therefore, we fail to reject. We say that we have insufficient evidence to say that cigarette usage is independent of seatbelt use. There does not seem to be any relationship between seatbelt usage and cigarette usage. I also want to just go over one part of a problem you have in your homework, problem number 9 in your homework. And one of the questions in here asks you to find the component of the chi-square for one of the cells in the table. And in this table, they're looking at the relationship between whether a woman had an epidural during childbirth and whether she was breastfeeding at 6 months. So what we're going to do to answer this question, I'm going to open up the data table in StatCrunch. And the one thing I want to point out to you is that the totals are already shown in here in the third column, and I'm going to go ahead and take those out because when I create the contingency table, it will automatically create totals for me. I don't need to take this column out because I just won't select that when I set up the contingency table. So I'm going to go to Stat, Tables, Contingency with Summary. And I'm going to pick my columns, yes and no, and then I'm going to pick my row labels, which in this case was just a dash. And I want to select here under display contribution to the chi-square. Now I have to remember what's shown where. So the columns here were whether or not the woman had an epidural, and the rows are breastfeeding at 6 months, yes and no. And they want the contribution for the epidural, yes, and breastfeeding, no, which would be this cell right here. So the contribution to the chi-square, there is 2.03, which I've entered in here in my stat lab. And then if you look below, here's my chi-square, has 1 degree of freedom. The chi-square statistic is 4.79, and the p-value is about 0.03. And in fact, the last question in the problem is going to ask you to find that p-value, and actually you've got it right now since you created the chi-square, the contingency table, and calculated the chi-square here in StatCrunch. You can go ahead and add that p-value in here, and then they're going to ask you to interpret it. So that will help you work on this problem number, I believe it's number 9 in your homework.